I'm Edward Herman. Welcome to the History Channel. A newspaper recently brought together 10 auto writers to see if they could agree on the greatest car ever made. There were votes for Jaguar, Duesenberg, and Rolls, but no consensus. But sales prices do tell us which are the most valuable. Our program looks at the world's most expensive automobiles, such as the Bugatti Royale, 20 feet long, 3.5 tons, worth more than $9 million. Many other classics are rolling works of art, with prices well into the 7 figures. Join us now for History Channel's presentation of Ultimate Autos, $1 Million Cars. Some automobiles have become so revered, they are almost priceless. These rare autos were created for wealthy and demanding people who wanted to drive the best. Today, most of these automotive gems are hidden behind mansion gates and the doors of guarded garages. Come with us as we uncover the world's rarest, priciest, and most interesting autos. Today, a handful of well-maintained or carefully restored, historically significant automobiles can command $1 million or more. These cars are being bought by people who can have nearly anything in the world.
You are talking about people with just a tremendous, usually, amount of worth, but that are fundamentally car people. They really love it. They could afford to buy collections of anything. They could afford to do just about anything, boats, airplanes, artwork, but they choose to have cars.
Most collectors obviously have a love of the automobile, and they like to collect cars that maybe they grew up with, or perhaps their father grew up with.
Well, I got attracted to cars generally back when I was in high school and bought a '53 Chevy and took it apart and rebuilt it and put it back together and began a love affair with cars. When I finished, I had a box full of parts that I wasn't sure exactly where they should go, but the car ran great without them.
To avoid having any leftover parts, many collectors hire someone else to restore their cars. But some have their own restoration shops. One of the most complete facilities is at the Nethercutt Collection in Sylmar, California. Here, a full-time staff turns well-worn classics into show winners. Even if a collector can't afford the splendor of the Nethercutt Collection, many try to transform their acquisitions into showpieces. This time-consuming hobby takes its toll on the owners.
And right now you're seeing a huge generational shift. There are a lot of kind of older collectors who were collecting cars in the 60s and 70s and 80s who are now, I think, tired of it a little bit. It takes a lot of sort of manpower and effort and storage facilities to store collections of cars.
Some of the new generation of collectors question the desirability of restoring these cars to better the new condition.
So if you have a car that's very correct and very original and it has a very fine patina, you should probably leave it alone and think about leaving it that way because it's very special.
The restorers that have gained notoriety in recent years try to keep the vehicles as close to originality as possible, but also make them usable and functional, displayable, drivable, and raceable.
Some have become a bit fanatical about the question of restoration.
You know, I've had people come up to me and say, if you ever restore these cars, we may put a contract out on you because we've been following these cars for years.
Others are a little more flexible about restoration.
I love original cars, but I also love restored cars. I mean, I love taking cars that are derelicts and bringing them back up to the specifications that would today, let's say, be perceived better than. But I don't think one is right and one is wrong.
Part of the reaction against over-restoration may be a backlash against the fierce competition at the major motor shows, like Pebble Beach in California.
Pebble Beach is the ultimate heavyweight fight car show in the world for the collector car.
Some people will spend a year, maybe 2 years, even restoring a car, just with the idea of trying to win that major concours. Sometimes it doesn't really make that much sense.
Not only does it take time, it's expensive.
And the preparation efforts are really staggering, especially for a car where just to do a cosmetic restoration, I'm not talking a complete restoration, just to bring it to Pebble Beach could be $250,000.
The time and money required to compete weeds out the wannabes.
There are, a few dozen players that come back to Pebble Beach with new cars every year. And you just kind of think about what it would take, not only to have some of these cars that are Pebble Beach worthy, but to be able to come back every year, every other year with something new and something special.
They're there because it's a lifetime passion. And for my money, that's the way it should be, is that the real owners are lovers of the automobile.
These car owners tend to think of their prized possessions as works of art.
I certainly do consider cars a piece of art. In their own way, obviously, especially the early cars, they were handcrafted, just like, an artist working his easel. There was a craftsman who built that particular car.
While Van Goghs are worth a lot more than any automobile, a painting can't be driven.
There's something about the fact that this is rolling artwork, that people actually sat in them and they drove around and they were on the streets. And again, it's that feeling of nostalgia that it's hard to imagine anybody actually did that. So it's a hands-on thing.
A growing number of collectors enjoy being able to drive and race their automotive art collections.
Since they're mechanical animals that are engines made to turn over and move people from one place to another, it seems only right to me that you can't continue to use them the way they were built, as opposed to sticking them in a trophy room or putting them up on a pedestal or wrapping them up in some garage where nobody will ever get to see them again.
Driving the cars is fun, but some find the siren call of their next acquisition irresistible.
I always consider collecting to be terminal. It's a disease that you're stuck with for the rest of your life. And I think the search, the chase, finding something different is what most collectors I find enjoy the most.
The kind of Sherlock Holmesian aspect of the search and the identification, and then the negotiation, and then the restoration, it really is at least half the thrill.
Many hope to find the proverbial car hidden away in a barn.
Every rumor you ever hear about somebody saying, oh, there are a bunch of old cars out in that barn, you gotta go look.
I myself dream it every night when I go to sleep, finding something special that's been lost to time.
That doesn't happen too often. It's more likely that a valuable car will be found at an auction. Firms like Christie's, known for auctioning fine art, rare books, and furniture, also have an automotive division. These auctions can become quite heated.
It obviously is a great adrenaline rush, I'm sure, when you're actually bidding and you think you're about to get a car. It can be very exciting how far that car will actually go in the auction.
Some prefer to shun the limelight of an auction when buying $1 million car. They tend to prefer quiet, private sales.
They kind of want to build the collection without raising your hand in public and saying, I'll bid $2.2 million on that car.
Not buying at an auction can be a lot more work, because the collector, not the auction house, has to search out the cars. But it can be more fun.
That might mean traveling the globe, finding the right vehicle, looking for that certain machine that meets their needs or exceeds it.
These global auto hunters know there are a limited number of cars that deserve the million-dollar status.
The true high-valued cars, obviously at the end of the day, are the rare vehicles.
This small stable of rare vehicles is likely to continue to increase in value.
There are certain marks that I believe will hold their value and continue to rise in certain models of those marks, which will rise far above their other brethren.
When we return, we'll take a look at these million-dollar automotive superstars. Sports cars are exciting, whether new or old. They sound great, look great, and are fun to drive. It isn't too surprising that they hold their value. Some sports cars have even climbed into the million-dollar range.
The hottest market right now is in kind of the sports car, racing car sort of era of very special cars built after the classic era.
Cars from the 50s and 60s like Jaguar D-types, Cobra Daytona coupes, and a number of different Ferraris have really climbed in value.
There's sort of a nostalgia for kind of the last of the sporting days of racing when kind of owning these fast cars was sort of it was sporty. It wasn't a big corporate effort to make the fastest car and to field the teams. It was about kind of the courage of the driver and the speed of the machine.
The desire to own and race cars made famous years ago spawned the vintage racing craze.
To me, getting them out on a track, recreating what really happened back in the 20s, 30s, post-war in vintage racing is, kind of really one of the real reasons that the sport is so popular.
One reason sports race cars have become so valuable is that there were so few made.
There certainly aren't enough vehicles that were produced in their day to provide for the demand that there are for the vehicle, for the buyers that are out there today.
One make that has attracted the attention of almost all sports racer collectors is Ferrari.
I think that Ferraris have had a mystique about them almost from the day they were produced. And they've always been a collectible. Everybody wants one.
The whole thing about the Ferrari name just immediately evokes, sort of competition and a great sound and gorgeous looking cars.
But what happens too is with Ferraris, like any other make, there's only a few cars that are considered to be great, and they command a lot of money today, in the hundreds of thousands, and in some cases in the millions of dollars.
Some of the very early Ferraris have become extremely valuable.
What we have here is it's a 1947 166 Spider Corsa with a serial number 002C. There's lots of controversy of which is the first of them, but this is the oldest Ferrari that we know in the world today.
There is another car that's claiming to be perhaps the earliest racing Ferrari. They're both important cars, whichever is the original one, because it was the evolution of the Ferrari in the post-war period when he started racing. It was his first racing car.
Enzo Ferrari wanted to build the best race cars in the world.
Ferrari was just dedicated to racing, and he produced road cars just to make money so he could be successful in the racing, and he was driven and determined, and that was his passion.
His racing cars were light and powerful. They started to win races right away. They made Ferrari a household name.
I ran into an Italian man who spoke English quite well, and he admitted he didn't know much about cars or Ferraris, which is unusual in Italy. But anyway, he went on to say that the one thing he did know about Enzo was that he was more important in Italy than the Pope.
One of the secrets of Ferrari's fame and his car's success was the V12 engine he helped develop.
In America in 1953, Chevrolet had only 6-cylinder cars. They had no V8s or V anythings. Ford still had the V8 flathead only, all with simple carburation. Now here's Enzo Ferrari in 1953. He has a 12-cylinder car. He has overhead cams. And on top of this 250mm, he has 3 giant 4-barrel carburetors. So he's well ahead of his time. Lots of RPM, lots of noise, lots of horsepower, lots of get up and go. At 1953. There's reason for the legend.
The 375 Mille Miglia, or MM, is another legend-creating Ferrari.
Basically, it just epitomized, the large capacity Ferraris, if you like. They were muscular-looking cars, and they sounded like it, and they really went at a tremendous pace.
It produced well over 300 horsepower, extremely fast, and very easy to drive. In its day, this car was capable of speeds well in excess of 160 miles an hour.
When you hear a 12-cylinder Ferrari coming down the road, you know it.
This loud performance wasn't cheap.
In 1954, if you had the ability and the opportunity and the right timing, you could have purchased one of these vehicles for something in the order of approximately $10,000 US.
That was about 3 times the average salary of an American worker in 1954. But it might have been a good investment.
Today, a vehicle of this nature, clearly well above $3 million.
They were always bigger than life. They were always the giant legend to go after.
Ferraris are not the only Italian make to ascend to these lofty and pricey heights. Rare, race-proven Alfa Romeos have been known to bring $1 million plus at auction.
Clearly, one of the most valuable vehicles in the world today are the pre-war sports racing Alfa Romeos. These vehicles have risen phenomenally over the past few years, far exceeding anybody's expectations.
The Alfa 8C 2300s established their reputation by winning Le Mans 4 times and the 1,000-mile Italian race, the Mille Miglia.
If you like, an early 8C Alfa was like the GTO of the 30s. It was the all-conquering race car of its day, and they won numerous races.
Part of the car's appeal to the general public was that you didn't have to be a race car driver to own one. Alfa would sell these cars directly from the factory.
They were genuine sports racing cars that could be raced or just driven, on fun occasions.
Some weren't content to just drive around town. They would enter races and challenge the pros.
You could also buy these great cars from the factory, and certain people, amateur drivers, could also, if they became a good driver, actually had the same car as the, if you like, the factory works car. And if you were a great driver, you could on occasion even beat them.
But not everyone raced their 8C. Giulio Rimaldi, a successful ice merchant in London, just liked to drive his car.
And he had these amazing ice chests actually built that sat on the running boards, and I believe he actually delivered ice using this car. So it's, affectionately known as the Rimaldi Alfa.
While they could be driven around town, what really made the Alfa sports cars famous was racing. To continue to win the Mille Miglia, Alfa produced an 8C with a larger engine in 1936. The new Alfa got a displacement boost to 2.9 liters. It became known as the 2.9. It is considered to be the fastest pre-war production sports car.
The 2.9 AC2900B Mille Miglia Spider that we see here today, one of the most phenomenal vehicles of its type, one of just 4 that were completed.
This car was raced in 1938 as part of the Alfa team under the direction of Enzo Ferrari. Once again, Alfa Romeos won the Mille Miglia with average speeds of over 80 miles per hour. The car's rarity and its racing heritage make it extremely valuable today.
It's near impossible to put a value on a vehicle like this. you'd first have to talk the owner into selling. Would he take $5, $6 million? No, something far north of that.
Some people are surprised that it is so valuable when they see its blemished, cracked paint.
Do these detract from the vehicle's value? Some people might walk by and think, this vehicle belongs in a junkyard. Most people recognize it for what it is, probably one of the most significant automobiles in the world.
It's an example of the new attitude toward preserving rather than restoring historic autos. To some, the pre-war Alfas and the early Ferraris embody the Italian spirit that embraces life with a vigorous charm. But rare sports racing cars are not the sole province of Italy. The British and the Americans have also produced fast cars that continue to attract collectors and weekend racers. There is no other British race car that continues to bring as much pride to the Union Jack as the Jaguar D-Type. Its racing exploits in the mid-50s secured its place among the motoring world's greatest.
The D-Type is really its most successful racing car they ever built.
A near victory at Le Mans in 1954 was just a triumph for the stunning string of wins that saw D-Types take Le Mans honors in 1955, 56, and 57. Jaguar used aircraft design principles to build a very sleek and aerodynamic car. The slippery shape helped to boost the car's speed.
And at Le Mans they would approach speeds of around 170 miles an hour, which is a pretty incredible pace to do for 24 hours.
It was a grudge match against the formidable Ferraris. Jaguar was determined to outclass the competition in every way.
At this time also they had disc brakes. Ferrari was still running on drum brakes at this time. They had a world-class beating car.
The D-Type's sleek, classic lines inspired the famed XKE. But not many D-Types were made. They've become quite valuable.
The value of a D-Type today, and the one behind me, Christie's sold a couple of years ago, just in excess of $1 million. Although it was like the staple race car for Jaguar, they only produced, in fact, probably around 60, 65 models.
Today, there are only a few left, and they sometimes turn up in the most unlikely places.
And they approached me and they said, Frank, we've got this car that you just have to see. It's in a barn.
Was laid up in this Connecticut barn for years and years. And one night, apparently, some thieves tried to steal it. And they were literally caught pushing this car down the road. And when Christie's came to sell the car, it was exactly as it had been in the barn, and it still had the police fingerprint dust on it, which we actually left on it because it was part of the charm and history of the car at the time.
It just looked like it had been in a barn for a number of years. And believe it or not, it did start.
After moving a squirrel's nest and a family of mice, the car was on its way to a new home, where it has delighted the owner ever since. The Europeans were not the only ones to produce historically important million-dollar sports racers. Carroll Shelby's outrageously powerful Daytona Cobra Coupes have raced their way into that lead.
The Cobra Daytona Coupes are one of the few American vehicles that exceed that magic $1 million mark.
The Daytona Cobra Coupe is a particularly significant car. It's the only American car to ever win the World Manufacturers Sports Car Championship.
This particular vehicle, CSX 2601, is one of just 6 completed. 5 are well accounted for with private collectors. 1 remains mysteriously aloof with an unknown owner who's had the vehicle for many, many years.
These beautiful and rare cars were created in just 4 months.
And the guys that worked on it worked about 24 hours a day to get it done. And the car was completed and running by the end of January 1964.
Shelby saved time by using the Cobra Roadster as the car's base, but he needed a more aerodynamic body for sustained high-speed racing.
The Cobra Roadster on high-speed tracks like they had in Europe and Daytona ran into a brick wall at about 160 miles an hour aerodynamically.
Getting the body right was a challenge.
I mean, they didn't have the kind of wind tunnel equipment and the type of testing that they have now for aerodynamics. And everybody at that time was really fishing in the dark.
Shelby's team was surprised after the car's stunning first test runs at the Riverside, California Raceway.
All the guys really got pumped up because all along people looked at the car like, well, you know, this is a folly, it ain't gonna work.
When the car performed beyond their expectations, they painted it and packed it off to Daytona.
When we went to Daytona, we were the fastest qualifier. We were fastest in practice. Set new track records all the way through. When the race started, it was very close between the Ferrari GTO and ourselves. They ran together, but eventually we pulled away.
They were 20-some miles in the lead when the car caught fire and withdrew from the race.
Scared the hell out of everybody because there were like 55 gallons of gasoline in a drum that we were fueling from, and that was right over the fire. And if that thing would have exploded, we would have had a real mess.
Thanks to the fast work of the pit crew, no one was killed. But they had to work all night to clean up the car. There was a publicity photo shoot the next morning. They made it. 1 month later, they went from fire to rain when they raced at Sebring. This time, they won. It was the first in a long string of victories that took them around the world.
The Cobra team really created a stir in Europe and all over the world because it was an American team run by Americans with basically an American car.
In 1 year, the Cobra Coupes racked up enough wins to give the team the World Championship. And then, they were retired.
You know, it's a very funny thing. After the 1965 season was over, these cars were put up for sale, and nobody wanted them. They were last year's race car. They had no value. God, if we'd known then what we know now, we'd have bought 2 of them and stuck them in a garage someplace and used that as retirement.
We all have our regrets, but there will always be new sports race cars out there that will climb in value. However, there is one type of high-value auto that will never be made again. These are the recognized classic cars. We'll take a look at this finite group of rolling sculptures when we return. The newest Rolls-Royce starts at something over $200,000. Cheap compared to some of the old ones. We return to Ultimate Autos. The Classic Car Club of America lists almost 100 makes as potential classics. The club doesn't discriminate between American or foreign built. Instead, to qualify, a car must have been built between 1925 and 1948, and in general have been high-priced, rare, limited editions. This means most of the cars had pretty notable owners.
You know, I think almost every great car that was ever produced was expensive. So you start off with somebody who could afford the car back in, whether it be the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, had to be wealthy to buy the car.
These exceptional cars attract the same type of buyer today. Someone who can afford to own the best.
It's sort of this being able to buy the ultimate beauty in automobiles, the ultimate sort of elegance, and just to sort of be part of it. And you kind of throw yourself back to a different era by even being around them.
Not every classic car has risen to that dividing line of value, the $1 million sale. And some have actually risen and fallen. But according to experts in the field, there are a handful of $1 million classics whose owners will only see the prices go in one direction, up.
When you get into the high dollar value of classic cars, a lot of it is due to the fact that they don't make them anymore. You know, they aren't painting Rembrandts anymore. They aren't going to make any more Duesenbergs.
And like the Duesenbergs, nearly all experts agree that the mid-1930s Mercedes 500K and 540K special roadsters are among the world's most desirable autos.
One of the Mercedes' great designs, they were using the 500 chassis, which was a supercharged engine, wonderful performance. It was, if you like, one of the ultimate European manufacturers at the time.
These sleek and sexy cars were built for touring, not racing. But the owners probably liked speed.
They have a 5-liter inline supercharged 8-cylinder engine that when driven produces 100 horsepower to put the throttle all the way to the floor. Then it makes an additional 60 horsepower. And is it surprising? It comes on strong and pulls. These are very, very fast cars.
This car was originally bought in England by a wealthy insurance broker who saw it displayed at a motor show. Over the years, it changed hands several times.
Until 1956, when it was bought by a butcher. He drove the vehicle for 1 year, and then he took it off the road because of some minor mechanical problems. He put it behind his shop in the shed, and never touched it again.
And being in the wonderful climate of England, the rain and the elements got in a little bit, and the car went all rusty. The mice got into the seats, they ate the upholstery.
In 1988, it was rediscovered. It went through an auction, unrestored, original and untouched, sold for a phenomenal amount of money.
The butcher's car, the 500K, was sold by Christie's for $2.7 million back in the day, and it was totally unrestored.
The butcher's car, as it's known because of its last owner before it was discovered, has continued to increase in value after being restored. Equally as impressive, the Mercedes 540Ks were introduced in 1936.
The 540K was really just a logical development from the 500. It was essentially the same car with just a larger horsepower. Again, it was relatively rare in its time, and they didn't produce hundreds and hundreds of them. So it was again the top of the line Mercedes that you could buy in the mid to late 30s.
Once again, rarity helps. Every time a 540K sells, it usually sets a new record. They can easily cost $3 to $4 million. The 500Ks and 540Ks were built for wealthy, demanding, and powerful people who wanted and could afford the fastest and the best. In the United States, those people might have bought Duesenbergs. Several of the 400-plus Duesenbergs that were built have soared into the $1 million-plus range. These bold and dashing autos caused a term to be coined.
Well, the term "it's a doozy" has become part of everyday speech, and it refers to something that's a superlative, and it came from the Duesenberg automobile. The phrase "it's a doozy" means that it's the best, or it's the biggest, or it's the greatest.
Duesenbergs obviously are one of the greatest names in the car manufacture to have ever graced this world, and they strove when they were new to be the ultimate luxury car.
These cars attracted the rich and famous of their day. Royalty, industrialists, and movie stars drove doozies. But keeping a luxury car maker alive during the Depression was a struggle. They had to create some excitement to stimulate sales. One way to do this was to provide screen idols with cars. The company scored a coup when it placed a pair of specially built roadsters in the hands of two of the most popular stars of the 1930s, Clark Gable and Gary Cooper.
Well, they loved cars, and it was part of their image. Both Gary Cooper and Clark Gable each had other Duesenbergs. They were known for their cars. They were always seen in the latest, fastest, best automobile. So it clearly was a case of the ultimate people with the ultimate car.
The Gary Cooper and Clark Gable Duesenbergs are very important Duesenbergs. Basically, they were supercharged Duesenbergs built on a short chassis. And they both had these wonderful two-seater sort of racing body styles, if you like, and they were the ultimate Duesenbergs, really, of their day.
So you've got the shortest Duesenberg chassis built for a passenger car. You've got the lightest body, and you've got the most powerful engine. So it's unbelievable and unbeatable combination. It really is the ultimate muscle car, if you will.
Each of these Duesenbergs is estimated to be worth at least $5 million. While Duesenberg and Mercedes are well-known names, some of the world's most valuable cars are relatively obscure. We'll discover these hidden beauties when we return. One automobile that is highly prized by knowledgeable collectors but almost unknown by anyone else is the Pierce Silver Arrow.
The Pierce Silver Arrow was basically a car way ahead of its time. It had styling features and design features that were probably 10 years ahead of its time, especially in its aerodynamic form.
When a young designer, Phil Wright, couldn't convince General Motors to build his daring new car, he took his designs to Pierce Arrow. Pierce Arrow was a manufacturer of fine but not too daring motor cars. They were nearly wiped out by the Depression and desperately needed something to stimulate sales. They decided to try Wright's design.
Well, Pierce Arrow was on its last legs anyway, and couldn't really, this was in '32, couldn't really go anywhere but up, they thought.
Wright was told to have the first Silver Arrow ready for the 1933 New York Auto Show. He didn't have much time.
I'm not clear. I think it was either 5 or 8 weeks they had to build the first one. And as they were building it, the design kept changing.
Wright and the engineers battled over how long the car should be, whether it should be a 2-door or a 4-door, and hundreds of other details. But they made their deadline. An exhausted team shipped the first Silver Arrow to New York on New Year's Day. 3 more were soon shipped to the auto show in Boston, and the last Silver Arrow was shipped to Chicago, where it was displayed at the World's Fair Century of Progress exposition. The car's streamlined shape and sumptuous interiors stunned the public.
It was very far ahead of its time, and I'm sure that people who saw it recognized it for being just overwhelmingly impressive as a car of the future.
After making the rounds on the show circuit, the cars were sold for $10,000 each, about double what a standard Pierce Arrow cost. The original buyers should have hung on to those cars. Today, they are worth more than $1 million.
But it was a great car then. It was a great car when it was produced in 1933, and it's considered one of the world's great cars today. It's still going to be always considered like a Mona Lisa of the automotive world.
Another silvery auto that's worth more than its weight in gold is the famed Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost.
The Silver Ghost certainly is the car that made Rolls-Royce's reputation. Started in about 1906-07. The Silver Ghost was just an ultimate car of its day in its refinement, its quiet running.
Almost all Rolls-Royces built between 1907 and 1926 would eventually be called Silver Ghosts. But to many, there is really only one true Silver Ghost, the first one.
And because of its appearance and because of its refinement, it became nicknamed the Silver Ghost. Cars in those days, because there were so few, often had nicknames, and that's where the tradition of the name came from.
In order to show off the Silver Ghost's durability and performance, it was entered in several endurance events.
So they then drove, under Royal Automobile Club scrutiny, the motor car non-stop between Scotland and London, covering 14,371 miles without involuntary stop. When the car was then disassembled at the end of it, the cost of rectifying worn parts was minimal. So it was really that particular exercise that made the name for that particular motor car and for the company.
But the eventual value of this historic car wasn't recognized. The company sold it to one of their traveling inspectors in 1908. Its owner put over 500,000 miles on it by 1947, when he asked Rolls-Royce for some minor maintenance assistance. Rolls-Royce was happy to help, but the owner died before much progress could be made. His heirs decided to sell the car to the company, where it's been ever since.
Of course, has now become part of automotive history and is reputed to be, that actual vehicle is reputed to be the most valuable in the world.
Even if someone were willing to pay the car's estimated $50 million price, it probably isn't for sale. Among those cars that are actually traded, one type is considered to be the world's most sought-after, expensive, and unique: the Bugatti Royale. Many think that the Royale was the greatest achievement of noted race car and luxury car builder Ettore Bugatti.
Bugatti was just trying to improve upon his mark and model, and if you like, beat the Duesenbergs and Bentleys and Rolls-Royces and have the ultimate car in the world.
Bugatti Royale is almost a mythical creature. They do exist, but most people haven't seen one.
Well, when you think about taking something as enormous as a Bugatti Royale and the possibility that because of its size it could come out looking awkward, heavy, ponderous, it's a great tribute to Bugatti that they were able to create something of that enormous magnitude that actually looks flowing and graceful.
I think they were built primarily as a work of art, not necessarily just a machine with a purpose to get you from point A to point B. I mean, this is, about getting there in style and being different and making a statement.
Talk about a man of vision. Ettore Bugatti decided that he was going to build 6 Bugatti Royales that would be the supreme example in automotive history of a car.
It was probably, I'm sure, the most expensive car built at the time.
Bugatti's $40,000 Royales were expensive, but they didn't depreciate. In 1987, a Bugatti Royale broke the world's record for any car at auction when it was sold for $9 million.
The Bugatti is a symbol for everything that's great about the automobile.
While no other cars approach the Royale's price tag, all of these cars spark the imagination and make us wonder if any more are hidden away in someone's barn.
I think that's the dream that I hope to have for the rest of my life. And I think there's an awful lot of collectors like that.
There are lost cars. There are still valuable cars out there that are hiding, waiting for someone to discover.
And it's like winning the lottery. So it's worth looking. You got to keep looking.
Whatever you do, you can be sure that there is joy to be found in owning one of the automotive world's crown jewels. The market for classics occasionally crashes. One collector bought a 1962 Ferrari for $15 million, then sold it for just $4 million. But the long-term trend is definitely up. Back when E.L. Cord took over Duesenberg, he said, "Never mind what it costs, just build it." Many car collectors have a similar motto. Never mind what it costs, just buy it. For the History Channel, I'm Edward Herman. Thank you for joining us.